Welcome to Real Talk Torah, courtesy of the DataBeis with Rabbi Yehoshua Eisenberg. I'm Rabbi Yehoshua Eisenberg, and you've just entered the DataBeis. And for Real Talk Torah, the issue that we're going to discuss today is an issue that we've been dealing with for a long time, and at this point, in many ways, it might feel like it's old news, but I do feel like it's the perfect time, actually, to reflect, and that is the issue of COVID-19, the coronavirus, different things we can possibly learn from the virus, especially at this point in retrospect. So, yes, there are a lot of different opinions going back and forth about what to do about the coronavirus, shut down, lockdown, open up, masks, no masks, and vaccine or no vaccine. These are issues that are constantly evolving and developing, and even though we've kind of been able to get used to a certain status quo, I don't think we should by any means be numb to the impact that the coronavirus has had on all of us, and especially in the Jewish community. So what I wanted to do at this time is I wanted to talk about some of the Hashkafic lessons that might be obvious and in plain sight to some people, but we can use a little bit of a review, and maybe some perspectives that maybe you did not necessarily notice about COVID-19 and its impact on us. And as I flesh it out, you'll see why I thought it was important even to discuss it at this point in time. We're 9 months in. We had this, we were pretty much locked down in March, April, and right after Purim, most people had to observe Pesach from their homes. So you might think that right now it's old news. And I think that there is a danger to this mindset that, COVID-19 is old news, besides for the fact that it's still a very real virus. It's still something that's in the air. I heard multiple shirim on the topic of Shomer P'sayim Hashem, that people want to do normative behavior, things that are regular everyday things, but it seems that Shomer P'sayim Hashem, from the poskim, it's pretty clear that it's only for Chashash Rachok, and it's only when it's preventative, and it's only for normal times, and we are clearly not in normal times. So I don't really want to talk about the hard halachic aspects of it, and so that's for each person and their Rav to discuss. And I certainly don't want to talk about the political aspect of it, because yes, as real as COVID-19 is, it's also been quite politicized. But again, I want to talk about some Hashkafic lessons that we can take away, that I believe are Torah true lessons. And of course, my opinion is not the only one out there. But again, lessons that I think we should be able to take away. One of the things that you have to be wary about when you're doing this kind of thing, and there was a Rav that I knew who I still know, he wanted my opinion. He knows me, that I'm a young rabbi, and he wanted to know, what do you hold? And he wasn't asking for halachic psak, but it was somewhat in jest, but somewhat, just in terms of sparking discussion. He said, what do you hold is Hashem's message? What does Hashem want to accomplish with COVID-19? And my initial answer, I think, is that anyone, and again, this wasn't to to Chas v'Shalom speak back to this Rav who I was having the discussion with, but it's just a matter of at least an attempt at humility of saying anyone who thinks they actually know what Hashem had in mind and why Hashem brought the coronavirus. Why, when last year, when we said Miba Magefa in Unisana Tokef, Hashem had plans to wipe out so many people with this virus and lock down so many people and cost so many people their jobs. So we just like we don't know why Hashem brought the Holocaust, we don't know why Hashem brought the virus. But there's some things that we could possibly learn from it. And I thought that one thing which might have been obvious. A lot of people were searching for connections between COVID-19 and in Yana Dioma, the Parsha, every time the Parsha came up. So there was a lot of alarm about the prospect of Mashiach coming, and I've heard many Rebbeim say, we should obviously always have emunah and bitachon, right? That b'chol yom sheyavo im kol zeach akelo. But this is not the first Mak'efa that Klal Yisrael has experienced, and so you shouldn't. And you have to be careful, because people who obsess over Mashiach and then they don't find it, then you have this this depression that follows. And we're supposed to always live life as if and not just as if, but yes, that we are anticipating the arrival of Mashiach, but not to lose hope when the thing that you thought was announcing Mashiach wasn't exactly it necessarily. And you might say, oh, yeah, okay, it's status quo now. We've been living the pandemic. We have been doing the social distancing, and we've been doing all the protocol, and it's shaken us up, but now we're used to it. And so, very quickly, the yearning for Mashiach for some people might just start to fade, because it was like, oh, it was a false alarm. And I think that's a mistake. Just to bring it to the floor, an idea that I thought of when I was approaching Rosh Hashanah. Right, so one of the classic things we hear about Rosh Hashanah is that we below Tekiyos Demiyushev and Tekiyos Demiyumad. Why? So the Gemara already brings down the Arbei Ves Satan, to fool the Satan. And the classical question is, well, why does the Satan get fooled every single year? And so the truth is, I wrote an essay quoting the different explanations of this Gemara and answering that question, addressing that question head on, how the Satan gets fooled every single year. And the classical explanation of the shofar, it's the shofar de Mashiach, that's based on Yerushalmi, it's a midrash, that there is the shofar of Mashiach, and the Satan is afraid. Every time he hears the extra tekiyos, then maybe the extra tekiyos are a signal of becoming a Mashiach. And so the question is, why does the Satan fall for this fake out every single year? And my suggestion of an answer was, who said it's a fake out? Maybe we're supposed to actually usher in the Mashiach with our tekiyos. Who said that we couldn't? Who said that Mashiach couldn't come at that moment? Right? The Satan, actually, what emerges is that the Satan has more emunah and bitachon in the coming of Mashiach than we do. The Satan sees the potential of Mashiach coming and how close we are at every single moment. So he's not the one who's missing the boat. We're the ones who are missing the boat. There's no Mashiach fake out. So, every little thing could be it. And it's just a matter of, having emunah and bitachon. And it doesn't have to be a pandemic, but the point is that you shouldn't stop yearning because, there wasn't, that the Mashiach didn't come this past Pesach, or he didn't come this past, whatever tekufa of the year it was in your, this Tisha B'Av. And he didn't come, so that should not be a reason why you should all of a sudden start losing faith. And on the contrary, every single passing year, it's better than any previous moment in time for Mashiach to come. So for the Satan to get nervous every single time, it's, again, because now is better than ever before. Now is certainly not worse, and by definition it's better, because every moment that we don't have Mashiach, we're still at least getting closer to the time that Mashiach should come. So that's just one idea. Now another idea, so going back to the idea of the shofar, which I think is important for the pandemic, and that is thinking to the times of Shemitah and Yovel, during Yovel. And this is an idea that I thought of around Parshas Bahar Bechukosai. The Yovel, we have the blowing of the shofar. And what is that shofar signaling? It's signaling the homecoming, that we are coming home. We are finally, or not we, but the servants, they're leaving their personal gullus and they're going home. It's a homecoming. And that's what the shofar signifies. And who's the shofar talking to? The shofar is really talking to all of Klal Yisrael, and it's a reminder that everything that we think is ours actually belongs to Hashem, right? On the one hand, you have Shemitah, where you let everything go. Right? Shemitah is where it's similar to Shabbos. you relinquish, you just, you leave it alone. But then Yovel is you completely send it home. Yovel is where you acknowledge, okay, it's not just that, yes, it belongs to Hashem, but Yovel means I even have to let it go. Whose schedule did not change when COVID-19 hit? Who wasn't reminded that what you think you have is yours in your possession? It's guaranteed, it's granted forever. There is no one that didn't have to shift somewhat because of the COVID-19 pandemic. There is no one that was so complacent at that moment to say, oh yeah, the world is my oyster. Because in fact it's not. The world is Hashem's world and everything we have is Hashem's. And the shofar of Yovel, it's supposed to shake us up and remind us who's in charge. And that's exactly what hopefully the pandemic did for us. If nothing else, the pandemic should have been humbling. It should have been a reminder, right? Like, what does Hashem want from the pandemic? I would say he wants our attention. What does he want from our attention? We could talk about that. But at the very least, he is trying to get our attention. What's he trying to tell us? We could try to wonder. But he's trying to tell us something. You can't be so complacent to sit through the pandemic and just say, oh yeah, and this has no implications for me in my life. There is something that I'm supposed to be hearing from this. So, remembering that everything is Hashem, Hashem makes the choices, that's an important takeaway already from the pandemic. Now, what is Hashem trying to tell us? So, I think plenty of things. Then there are two more ideas that I want to share in terms of what possibly Hashem is trying to tell us. When the pandemic hit, one of the main practical ramifications that it had on us was that we had to just close everything down, and particularly our shuls. People who attended minyanim regularly were davening b'yachidus. Now, for someone like myself, I personally, I'm a big stickler for minyan. I try very, very hard and to make minyan all the time, and I always, I'm very upset when I don't make it to minyan. And at least for Shachris, I try to make it a thing that I can daven at Nate's. But we were all shaken up by the fact that we couldn't go to shul anymore. And what was fascinating, and it wasn't just shul, it was the yeshivas, everything was closing down around Parshas Vayakel Pikudei. Vayakel Pikudei was the completion of the Mishkan. And it was a little bit of a slap in the face. We're talking about building Hashem's house, and we have our own Mikdashei Ma'at, and for the first time, in a long time, we actually had the feeling of being exiled from our Mikdash. Right? That isn't a feeling that we had to experience for thousands of years already. Because we had our shuls, we had our yeshivos, and as a result, we had some semblance of connection. And all the while, as we may have yearned a little bit for Mashiach, we may have yearned a little bit for the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, but we weren't shaken up. We may have yearned for the Gula, but we were never shaken up by Galus. Perhaps not since the Holocaust, not since any of those things. So, when we finally were awakened by this pandemic, we finally got to experience a little bit what Galus feels like. Just like, the feeling of, we knew that the Shechina is in Galus, Chazal tells us, the Shechinta Begalusa, and now we got to feel that. And to have that yearning to actually go back to our temple. And I think there is a big mistake, a Hashkafic mistake in one response that I saw, particularly around Pesach time. Now, I think it was coming from a good place, and I understand where it was coming from. But a lot of people, or at least I saw more than one person express this perspective, this thought. On Pesach we say Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim, but at least this year, I'll settle for Lashana Haba next year with friends and family. And I shared this thought actually on Tisha B'Av this past year, in the place where I davened. I was one of the speakers for the keynotes. Right, I was one of the keynote speakers. Right, that joke. It's an old joke, but I can't really tell it on Tisha B'Av. It's never appropriate then. But as one of the keynote speakers, I was sharing this idea and saying what I thought was the problem with it. next year I'll settle for being with friends and family. So the obvious problem is that's what we settled for the year before. We always settle for the status quo, things being the way they are, being with friends and family. We always settle for that. In fact, how many times when we say Lashon Haba B'Yerushalayim did we ever actually mean it? How can this year not be the year where you say, okay, really this time Lashon Haba B'Yerushalayim? Oh no, next year I'll settle. I want things to be like they were before. We take those things for granted now, certainly. But I'll tell you this, Hashem did not send us a pandemic just so that we should yearn for similar times from just a couple of weeks prior to the pandemic. That's a mistake. If anything, our yearning for Chadesh Yeminu Kekedem in the realist sense should be our response, now more than ever. And especially now when we're getting used to the pandemic, we're getting used to the new status quo. Now we have to start yearning more. Actually feel that we've been exiled and want to come back. Want to be reunited with Hashem. The pandemic should have been a time of yearning. And, obviously following all the rules that you're supposed to follow. But to yearn and not to settle. You have to stop settling. That's, we spend our lives settling. So there's that, and there's, one more thought, where the idea of quarantining was most obvious, and we were all ready for this Parsha well before it came. Right, Parsha's Tazria Mitzorah. Plenty of the responses to the COVID pandemic, COVID-19, especially the aspect of quarantine, sparked thoughts and references to Parsha's Tazria Mitzorah, because the Mitzorah is quarantined. In fact, this is perhaps what led Rav Chaim Kanievsky to Rav Chaim Kanievsky Shlita, and he should have refuah, but what led him to suggest that we work on humility and not speaking Lashon Hara, because these are two of the known main contributors to tzaras, and therefore the need for the Mitzorah to quarantine. We saw a lot of people who were being brazen and not humble in response to the pandemic. And this is a time where we have to, stop speaking badly about other people and be more humble. But indeed, a lot of us felt that parallel. We're like, oh, see, we're quarantined just like the Mitzorah. We all intuitively made that connection. And we had plenty of weeks to prepare for Tazria Mitzorah to think about it. And here's why I think we missed the boat on this parallel. Because I think there's a big contrast between most of us during quarantine and the Mitzorah in his quarantine. And it's as simple as Yashav Badad. You sit by yourselves. Now, granted, there were people who, Lo Aleinu and Rahman al-Tzlan, they had to be alone during the pandemic. And it was pretty terrible. And it's a great sense of suffering. It was true Yisurin. But the mashal I would give to explain what was wrong with our quarantine and how it differs from the Mitzorah would be the mashal of a child who had done the wrong thing and you sent them to time out. But when you sent them to time out, you allowed them to take a toy with them. Now, what's wrong with putting a kid in time out and letting him have a toy? It's a nice thing you can do, a little bit of rachmanas to let the kid have a toy. The problem is that the reason why you put a kid into timeout, sometimes it's because he needs a breather. That's understood. But more often than not, the point of timeout is that you want the kid to learn a lesson, and you want the kid to think about what he had done wrong so that he could be in timeout. And if that kid were to go into timeout and take a toy with him, he would in fact miss the boat on why he was put in timeout. The whole point of the timeout would be defeated. The whole purpose would be defeated. And I believe that when all of this started, we went into quarantine, but we all took toys with us. We had the Wi-Fi, the internet, we all had a device. And that device does many wonderful things. Zoom, shiurim, podcasts, like this one, though this one didn't exist at the time. You were able to have Zoom davening, even if it didn't necessarily constitute as tefillah b'tzibor, as a minyan, but still you had different kinds of support systems. Yeshivas were able to learn over Zoom. A lot of good things you can do over Zoom. People were able to continue work when they were on Zoom. But the internet also allowed us to completely continue on our regular way, to completely be distracted, to continue engaging in social media, to do all the different things that we used to do. And, posting the memes and posting the rants on social media, all the different things that we would normally do beforehand. Pictures, whatever. And how much of that time did we actually make like the Mitzorah, Yashav Badad, without the toys, without the distractions, and actually having the self-introspection that the quarantine was actually designed for? I think the best, service a person could do when they are quarantined, and we're in a certain sense we're losing the opportunity as we open up, and we should appreciate the fact that we're opening up, but we should not lose the inspiration and the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. We should train ourselves now to take some time where we put the device down and completely just think about things that we're supposed to be thinking about. Think about your relationship with Hashem. Think about why Hashem would try to do something to us. Think about what our yearnings should be. Think about where we would like to be. And not just, what I would settle for, if I can think about the most recent time where things were pretty serene and okay. But think about the ideal that Hashem would like us to be at. I think these are some of the things that we should be thinking about, things that we should have thought about, and if we haven't thought about them, we should think about them now. And Be'ezras Hashem, we should never see these tzaros again. Everyone who's suffering from it should have refuah shalema, and we should see the end of the COVID-19 pandemic. But we should be inspired by the COVID-19 pandemic. Don't let the positive impact of the things we've experienced together through this pandemic, don't let that fade away without us taking something away from it. We should go back, and if we're going back to shul, we should go back with a hislavos, with a certain sense of inspiration for being able to be united with Hashem in the Mikdash again. And we should, again, not settle, but this should be the time where we maximize our yearning. All right, we'll see you next time. Thank you for tuning in.